FM Radio 93.2. We're your voice. Your voice.
This is Bristol. It's Friday, 6 o'clock. Welcome to BCFM's Politics Show. I'm Tony Gosling. And helping me review this week's news is LibDem Bristol Mayor Candidate Mary Page and ex-Brexit Party prospective parliamentary candidate for Gloucester, Richard Ford. Who owns Britain author Kevin Carhill is here too. So, joining us this week to review this week's news and really also to just look back at the result of December's general election from the Brexit Party. It's Richard Ford and Mary Page, who's the Lib Dems candidate for mayor here in Bristol. Hi, and welcome to the Politics Show.
Good evening, happy New Year.
Hi, everyone. Well, maybe we should just start, I think, with you, Mary and Richard, just giving us your take on the election result. Mary, first of all, Labour here in Bristol, where Marvin Rees was campaigning for Jeremy Corbyn, it didn't really happen. There was a big rally on College Green just a week or so before the general election, but the result was quite a resounding victory for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. So the main opposition left with egg on their face.
I think, to be fair to the Bristol Labour Party, good campaign here, and they managed to retain 4 seats, but they bucked the trend compared to the rest of the country, and the rest of the country, for whatever reason, decided that Jeremy Corbyn was more of a threat than Boris Johnson. Personally, I wouldn't want to choose between Papa Giuseppe or Pinocchio.
Well, what was the reason? What do you think was the reason that people did just left? Because he did actually quite a lot worse, Corbyn, didn't he, than in 2017?
It's so difficult to see where people think, because obviously I think Liberal Democrat. So, for me, the choice was obvious. I thought Jo Swinson was a credible candidate, a totally capable young woman who was offering a vision of hope. But
you were totally wrong, weren't you?
People...
I mean, you've got to connect with the voters, surely, and you were completely wrong on that.
I think that she may not have connected with the voters that well. That doesn't mean to say the Liberal Democrat message is wrong. And it doesn't mean to say the voters are wrong for the choices that they make. They make the choices based on the evidence that they see at the time and the priorities that they see at the time. And there's an awful lot of people who really sort of went for the just get Brexit done message. But unfortunately, we are going to be stuck with 10 years more of negotiations and trade negotiations, and Brexit won't just be done on the 31st of January. That is such a fallacy. It is not true to say that Brexit will suddenly cease to be part of the conversation post January the 21st.
I mean, the Brexit ministry is going, though, isn't it, at the end of January? They've said, actually, that's it, no more Brexit ministry, that's off now.
Just because you write a word out of history or usage...
It's a government department. It's a government department that's going, not just a word.
Yeah, but you don't, just because you write that out and call it something else, doesn't mean to say it doesn't exist anymore. We could, tomorrow, we could say that sexism doesn't exist and we shouldn't have any form of equality minister or anything like that. But it wouldn't mean to say that there's no sexism going on, and it wouldn't mean to say there's no racism going on.
I mean, isn't it simply that Jo Swinson was just completely rejected her idea that the result of the referendum would be completely ignored? In fact, not just ignored, but the opposite would happen, that we would completely get rid of any kind of process to leave the EU. That just did not go down well with voters.
I can't say it went down at all well with voters, and I think sadly that it got lost, the really good hopeful message, the messages about well-being, the messages about decarbonising the economy, the message about fixing our broken politics, our intention to put, penny on the pound in order to pay for the NHS, our good policies on education. All of that got lost in this very, very sort of tit-for-tat, sort of just very simplistic messaging, and unfortunately that's sometimes what happens in elections. People want simple answers to what actually are very complex questions, and somehow we need to get our message across better to the voter to make sure that they understand what the Liberal Democrats are for, and Liberal Democrats, what's the point?
Well, because before we hear from Richard, I want to hear a bit more from you about how you think this might affect the mayoral election this year, which you're standing in, and it's a sort of almost impossible for it not to affect, because of course the standing of the Labour Party nationally was one of the things that led to Marvin Rees, the present Labour Mayor, romping home. Now the Labour Party doesn't seem to be doing so well nationally. I wonder if you think that's going to affect things much. But anyway, I thought we'd have a listen to Labour Mayor Marvin Rees, who won't reply to my phone calls, but he does appear on the media from time to time, and here he is on election day actually saying why he thinks people should be voting Labour in the general election at the end of last year.
I've been saying that what is at stake is more than just policy, right? Labour Party's got superior policies. It's focused on poverty, focused on inclusion, social justice, and also been judged the best manifesto for the planet and for sustainability. But what's also at play is our country's culture. And we have an option here of a Prime Minister who would be inclusive, who's taken stands against racism, who grapples with the complexity of life, and one who's talked about people like me having watermelon smiles and pickaninnies, talked in derogatory terms about women, gay people, Muslims. And what's that question is, what kind of leadership are we going to endorse? Who's going to get rewarded with national leadership by our country, and what would that say about us? So I'm hoping that people vote for hope today, and vote for a leadership with values, not a leadership of opportunism and a kind of self-proclaimed right to rule.
So that's Marvin Rees, Labour Mayor for Bristol, who will be standing again this May against you, Mary, and others, of course. What do you make of what he had to say there, then?
I actually have a great deal of agreement with what Marvin was saying about the choices that voters had, and I am surprised in some ways that Corbyn was made out to be such a dangerous figure, and that people couldn't sort of look past that and see some of the positives both in the Liberal Democrat campaign or in the Conservative.
Dangerous? In what way is Corbyn made out to be dangerous?
That was the phrase. I think it was just the tagging of that word, wasn't it, to him, instead of actually tagging Boris Johnson, a sort of shameless charlatan who really sort of will just make up anything to get Boris Johnson the job that Boris Johnson wants. Boris Johnson stands for nothing. He stands for himself. And in the mayoral, I think the whole point is that actually the key thing of the Scrap the Mayor campaign is it's not about me, Mary Page, going for mayor. It's about what we can do for Bristol and what we can do for Bristolians. It's about handing power and control back to Bristolians. So there's a very, very clear message about what I want to do. And unfortunately, the way that the mayoral has been run by the past two mayors is it's centralised power. And it's seen exorbitant payoffs, unnecessary payoffs, to chief executives. £98,000 paid off to a chief executive who'd been there just under 7 months. That's not good enough. That's a waste of our hard-earned taxpayers' money, and we need to stop that, and we need to change the system. The whole damn system is wrong.
I mean, he's mentioning there these phrases, watermelon smiles and pickaninnies. Now, I haven't seen the Conservative Party using those sorts of racist phrases against Marvin or anybody else. I don't know where he's getting that from. Do you think that Conservatives are actually racist, and is he right to be quoting those sorts of phrases as Tory phrases?
As far as I understand it, those were phrases directly lifted from Boris Johnson's articles in The Spectator. So I think that it is fair for Marvin to be saying that that's unacceptable language. It absolutely is. And we should call out racism or sexism or any other form of discrimination against anyone wherever we see it. And I stand with him in that.
OK. Now, Richard, thanks for being so patient. Richard Fall from Brexit Party. First of all, your situation was you were told, weren't you, by Nigel Farage, you weren't allowed to stand in that general election.
Well, it was a curious thing because I actually was one of the only 3 candidates who actually had got nominated. I was actually nominated in the first thing on the Monday morning, and I had to go actually withdraw my nomination. So it was a curious position actually up in Gloucester, yeah. But it was, of course, disappointing. It definitely was. But
was it the right thing to do, though?
Well, I think time will tell. I mean, obviously Nigel and the people in charge had their reasons for that decision, why it was made when it was made. It was very difficult to understand at the time, particularly in somewhere like Gloucester, where the other four candidates were all Remainers. The Conservative MP re-elected was a Remainer, the Lib Dem obviously a Remainer, the Labour Party candidate a Remainer, and the Green Party a Remainer. So, and Gloucester is a Leave voting city. I mean, it has voted Leave 58.5% in the referendum. So it was very hard to have four shades of Remain standing in a Leave voting city and being a Leave candidate and not being able to offer yourself to the electorate. Yeah, that was quite hard, but that was the policy, and we had to go along with it.
Are we going to get Brexit on the 31st of January?
I doubt very much whether we are, to be honest. I think there'll be shenanigans go on, there'll be a transition period and all the rest. But
you're sounding a bit curmudgeonly, if I might say.
Like
Jeremy Corbyn saying, we're still going to campaign against Brexit.
No, well, not at all. I mean, people have voted so many times for Brexit now in one form or another, whether it be a general election, a referendum, European elections last year, or whatever it may happen to be. But I'm very, I'd like to, and bizarrely, as a Brexit party, endorse a lot of what Mary as Lib Dem has said. And what I'd like to add is that, people in this general election in December, they weren't voting for Boris Johnson and the Conservatives. People were voting against Jeremy Corbyn. They're voting for the least worst option. They're not, that isn't an affirmation. I completely agree. Boris just stands for himself. We have urgent need of electoral reform in this country. So many people voting for the least worst option now. There should be more Lib Dem MPs, there should be more Green MPs, there should be more Brexit Party MPs. The Conservative Party is totally oversubscribed in Parliament. The House of Lords needs getting rid of. We need electoral and constitutional reform. We've had this ridiculous election where there's been the usual Red Scare campaign. I think Jeremy Corbyn, I do think he's dangerous. I do think he'd totally ruin the economy. He's on security matters. He's not, you can't trust him, but I don't think you can trust Boris either. The fact is, two totally inadequate candidates from Labour and Conservative, men of straw, people voting for least worst options against other people rather than the candidate they really want.
Well, it's all very well to blame the system, isn't it? But you're saying you need better proportional representation. Well, the country voted against that. I think it was 2010. Well, we had a vote about an alternative vote, which was a move towards PR, and there was a referendum at the same time as the election, and we voted against it.
It was an alternative vote system that was brought up as a sop, basically, to Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems at the time, and I have to say Nick Clegg wasted a great opportunity to try and introduce the Lib Dems at that time. Benefit of hindsight, they could have held out for PR at that time and they didn't do so, and I think they were bought off by cabinet positions and all the rest of it.
Do you want to say something about the system, Mary, because particularly with PR, because there's a different system for electing the mayor here in Bristol, isn't there, not the general election system?
I love the fact that we've got a different system for electing the mayor, and wouldn't it be wonderful if actually we could have that system for our local councillors as well, because there are so many people in Bristol to be represented, and I think the whole thing is, it is extraordinary. Look at a city that is as diverse as Bristol, and in politically diverse, as well as every other form of diversity, and we are represented by a Labour mayor and 4 Labour MPs. You would think I had an unassailable mountain to climb, but actually I am so emboldened and so excited by what we're getting on our canvass returns when we're speaking to people, because people don't like the system of mayor. It didn't bring this sort of utopia of hope that everybody thought it might. And of course it won't, because politicians are fallible humans. They are not superheroes. And we have not got, and we should not have this hero ideology where people are waiting for a knight on a white charger to come along and say this.
Just in a nutshell, what's wrong with the mayor system, do you think, then? What's wrong? Why do you want to change it back?
It centralises power. It centralises power. It centralises money. It wastes money through having all of the decision making in the middle. Of course, with the arena, we had the absolute sort of example of that, where 50 councillors out of 70, a really good, clear majority, voted to have the arena on Arena Island. The very next day, we had the mayor saying, no, I'm going to take the arena away from South Bristol, and we've got an election in Brislington East at the moment, and they are cross. They had the arena taken away from them and given to Filton and South Gloucestershire. That's not a mayor that is looking after Bristolians and looking after the needs of Bristol
What
South.
he's saying, to be fair, although he's not here, what he'd say is that it was too big a financial risk to take for the city. It should be a commercial venture, really, not something that the people of Bristol may have to pay for decades to come for.
could have done that commercial venture in the centre of the city of Bristol and helped South Bristol and East Bristol, some of the most deprived areas, and all of the central wards. He's always talking about sort of supporting those areas of Bristol which are deprived, and yet he didn't support them. He supported putting an arena in Boomtown of the North Fringe of Bristol, where it's going to, the majority of the benefit will go to South Gloucestershire businesses and South Gloucestershire residents, not Bristol residents.
Kevin, let me bring you in. Just give us a bit of a diagnosis of why Labour did so badly in this general election, do you think?
I think they were, and they failed to notice it, they were outmanoeuvred by the Tories. I personally believe the whole anti-Semitic thing was a stunt. And I got a letter back from the chief rabbi this morning because it didn't emerge. The BBC admitted to me that Andrew Neil should have been clearer about who the chief rabbi is. He was Israel's ambassador to Dublin for 5 years, a neutral figure. And the whole anti-Semitism is a problem in our society. It's not confined to the Labour Party. It's just as prevalent in the Tory Party and probably the Lib Dems. But Labour
I'm pretty sure that the Lib Dems are pretty good.
You had the Lib Dem MP in Bradford who was up for anti-Semitism about 10 years ago, David someone or other. There was a Lib Dem MP with a largely Muslim constituency.
But I mean, isn't there, Cooke, a bit of a problem with this being a bit of a witch hunt? That actually what happens is, all somebody does is they'll make say a comment out of a turn and even misquote, and then suddenly it goes on. I just want to play you an excerpt from Margaret Hodge, who was interviewed by the BBC, and her quote that she's quoting actually, and it's followed by an explanation by Gilad Atzmon, the jazz musician she's talking about, and she actually accuses him of saying that Hitler didn't go far enough. Well, he quotes his book. He quotes his own book and explains what he was actually saying and does the whole proper quote. So let's have a quick listen now to Margaret Hodge from the Labour Party making some amazing accusations about anti-Semitism, which actually proved to be completely opposite of what she was saying. So she's a Jewish Labour Party MP. So let's have a little quick listen to her now.
Astonished that this decision had been taken. Chris Williamson has got form. It's not just the clip that you showed. He also, on the night that we had the bombings, the killings in America in the synagogue, he chose that night to attack Jewish organizations. He defended a jazz musician who thought that Hitler hadn't gone far enough.
Is it true? Are you referring to me? Am I a jazz musician? Presumably I am. Let's see what I said about Hitler. It is more relevant than ever. In my book, The Wandering Who, published in 2011, at page 179, I'm saying the following. We, for instance, can envisage an horrific situation in which an Israeli so-called preemptive nuclear attack on Iran escalates into a disaster nuclear war, in which tens of millions of people perish. I guess that among the survivors of such a nightmare scenario, some may be bold enough to argue that Hitler might have been right after all. And I continue. The above is obviously a fictional scenario and by no means a wishful one, yet such a vision of a possible horrific developments should restrain Israel or Zionist aggression towards Iran. What I do in this text is producing a necessary warning to Israel, to America, to Britain, that apparently, according to Haaretz, is engaged in a drill together with the Israeli Air Force, not to push us into a new global conflict, into a new world war, because such event will have serious consequences. I do accept that some of you within the Israeli pressure groups the Ziocon merchants are upset by me advocating peace and harmony, opposing Israeli brutality and Zionist warmongering. Being a jazz musician, this is my role. Jazz is all about freedom, it is all about celebrating freedom, it is all about promoting the idea of free thinking.
Well, that's almost a kind of right reply there, because obviously he didn't get that on the BBC when Margaret Hodge was saying that Israeli jazz musician said that Hitler didn't go far enough. So what do you make of how effective that campaign? I mean, what he's implying there is that there are people within the Labour Party who are actually smearing Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me from the outside. And I've a little experience of watching these things. Like I said, the worst anti-Semitism I ever heard in the parliamentary building was a Tory person. I've never heard a soul in the Labour Party, and I knew quite a lot of people in the party, ever say anything anti-Semitic. You know, it was a smear, and the Labour Party fell for it.
Richard, what do you make of these accusations of anti-Semitism? You were saying something there about, a LibDem MP in the past having been accused of this sort of thing.
Well, I think, these things exist in every party, and I think the issue is one of how they're dealt with. The fact of the matter is within the Labour Party, I guess, Kevin, you were talking about Labour some time ago, but in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, when allegations were made, they really were postponed, the can was kicked down the road, they weren't dealt with. Now, you may have Islamophobes in the Conservative Party or other parties or Labour Party or anti-Semites, whatever. The question is, you're going to get bad apples in every barrel. The issue is the management of that party, when it's brought to light, having a due process, and if it's found to be the case and been proven beyond reasonable doubt, then expelling that member, and that's what didn't happen in Labour. So if there was a conspiracy theory within Labour, Corbyn's fault is that he, as the leader of the party, didn't sort it, didn't act upon it, didn't nip it in the bud, and then that allowed the whole thing to gather credence, and that's the key issue. I mean, we are, in the modern day and age, it's absolutely unbelievable that these things should still be existing.
Isn't there some sort of problem here, though, that we've got a conflation of Judaism, someone being attacked because they're Jewish, whether that's a race or religion is a whole other question,
course,
and Israel, because there are some legitimate criticisms of Israel, some of which are being said, well, actually, by saying that, you're anti-Semitic. So, for example, so if you say that I don't think that the State of Israel has a right to exist because of its violation of UN resolutions, then you could be branded anti-Semitic in some circles.
But I think the issue is one, you're quite right, of conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, perhaps, and there are very many Jewish people who also will agree and accept the fact that a lot of what Israel does is not right. It's not in accordance with UN resolutions and many other things. There's almost an apartheid policy almost in the West Bank in parts and in Gaza. So, no society, no country is perfect. So we can't have a situation where you can't call out Israel because of what it may do and be accused of being an anti-Semite. I mean, Saudi Arabia, they're chopping off people's heads in the market square. We can't not say anything about that and be called an Islamophobe, or the guy in Istanbul that was chopped into little pieces, allegedly. There needs to be an open, honest and transparent debate, and hysteria gets us nowhere. It needs to be clear.
Mary, do you think, what about Brexit? Do you think that played a part in the Labour defeat? Because there seems to be a kind of competition, really, between many of the, they call moderate wing of the Labour Party, are basically blaming Corbyn as an individual, whereas a lot of other people are saying, well, actually, it's because Corbyn was persuaded by these people not to go along with his Brexit promises. So what do you make of those two as potential reasons why Labour did so badly?
I think it comes back to what I was touching on earlier about the fact that politicians are fallible humans. They are humans with flaws, and the public, unfortunately, are being taught to think of politicians as people who have all the answers to everything, and that we can suddenly sort of wave a magic wand. Well, life isn't like that. You can't wave a magic on to solve.
I mean,
problems.
touching on what Richard was saying earlier, can we get, do you think, to a position where we're actually voting for someone rather than the lesser of various evils? That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Well, there is this strange crossover between the Brexit Party, I believe, and the Liberal Democrats in the fact that we both believe that power should be devolved down to the lowest level. And we also believe in constitutional change. So whilst our our views on Brexit are the opposite of each other, our views on making sure that the ordinary person in the street can take part in democracy and be as enabled and empowered as possible.
But at least people know what our views are. I mean, I don't agree with the Lib Dems, apart from PR. But actually, I do admire that you have an honest policy vis-à-vis Brexit and willing to say so. And I think that is the downfall of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour. You know, he was trying to ride two horses, dance at two weddings, and you can't do that. You know, Brexit Party was clear in its policy, the Liberal Democrats were clear in their policy, the Greens were clear in their policy. Corbyn smudged it because he's got to equate the literati of North London and so on, and the universities with the old Labour white working class.
Neil Clark is a British journalist, but he only publishes nowadays. They won't publish him in the Express or where he used to get published in the Daily Mail. His headline was that that Jeremy Corbyn was destroyed because he treated his friends worse than his enemies within his own party.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? This is historical failure by the Blair government to actually have stuck a label on all of the buildings that European funding built and all of the manufacturing that it brought in and all of those sort of things, all that celebratory stuff that they weren't brave enough to do when they had a stonking great majority, and they didn't realise, and they didn't, and they didn't make sure that their Labour heartlands in the north understood and were talking the same language. They neglected them, and they got so excited by London literati.
What Labour were doing was acting as if it was a southern England party. So the big cities in the south, which were so pro-Remain, they just focused on that as their policy and almost forgot about the north, Richard.
Well, I think that's true. You know, it's always the case, isn't it? Businesses have the same thing. You forget your core audience at your peril, and that's what the Labour Party has done. You know, they've tried to go out and get other audiences, win Remainers from the Lib Dems or the Greens, or steal someone else's clothes, and in so doing, they've forgotten their own key audience, and those people have felt neglected. And I mean, some of the places in the north that ended up returning a Conservative MP for the first time ever, or the first time in 100 years, tells you everything you need to know. But those people, I come back to my original point, are not voting for a Conservative MP or for Boris Johnson. They're voting against Jeremy Corbyn, against what's been said about him in the press, you know, the media campaign, the Reds Under the Bed campaign, whatever it may happen to be. But this society is broken until we can get a more representative system. That's why we spent 3.5 years buggering around with Brexit, because the people voted one way and the MPs wanted something else because they did not reflect the popular vote.
Well, those MPs are now gone, and we've got something called the Brexit Bill, which got its first reading just before Christmas. So let's have a listen now to Boris Johnson talking to that bill.
If we have learned anything from the experience of the last 3 years, it is that drift and dither means more acrimony and anguish, Mr. Speaker, and there will be nothing more dangerous for the new future that we want to build than allowing the permanent possibility of extending the implementation period in a torture we all remember that came to resemble Lucy snatching away Charlie Brown's football, or Prometheus chained to the Tartarian crag, his liver pecked out by an eagle and then growing back, as honourable members on all sides of the House will recall, and then growing back only to be pecked out again in the cycle repeated forever. This bill learns the emphatic lesson of the last Parliament, unlike members opposite, and rejects any further delay. It ensures that we depart from the EU on the 31st of January, and at that point Brexit will be done. It will be over. The sorry story of the last 3.5 years will be at an end, and we will be able to move forward, Mr. Speaker, together.
Richard Ford from the Brexit Party. Will it really be over at the end of the month?
I very much doubt it. I think Boris Johnson's a complete fraud. It's well documented that back in 2016 he didn't know which side he was going to be on. He had an op-ed written for both sides of the argument. I don't trust him. He's a classicist, isn't he? He was pontificating in ancient Greek recently, and I wrote in Latin, my schoolboy Latin, Timeo Danios et dona ferentes, from the Trojan horse. I don't trust the Greeks, especially when they're bearing gifts. Now, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Let's see what he does. Today's the 3rd of January. Parliament's not convened till next Tuesday. If we really believe that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives, even with a majority of 80 or whatever it is, that's basically only been wrung out of the people by a dysfunctional electoral system from the 19th century, if we really believe that he's going to deliver what the people voted for back in June 2016 within 3 weeks, I think we're crackers.
So what parts of Brexit do you worry won't happen? I mean, what are there to do with... I mean, for example, one of the key things, for example, is in or out of the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice.
There's the bill for leaving, there's the transitional period, how long that's going to be, how long we're going to be contributing towards that. There's going to be the whole business with this gentleman's from Ireland, I think. I believe the manufactured problem on the Irish border, which didn't exist prior to 1973, I think you'll confirm is the case. There was no problem of freedom of movement of goods, services and labour between the Irish Republic and the rest of the UK back in the 1970s before we joined. So I think it's a manufactured problem there. Where is the border going to be in taxation terms, in customs terms? Is it going to be in the Irish Sea? Is it going to be on the island of Ireland? So there are lots...
Let's just let Kevin have Can you just reply to that, Kevin?
I think Johnson and the Tories have given up on both Northern Ireland and Scotland. They don't believe they're going to stay in the Union. Most Tories would like to see Northern Ireland gone. They hate the Northern Irish.
But don't they depend on DUP votes, for example?
No, they don't depend on DUP votes.
Not they don't now, but they did.
But they didn't really then. And look at what the frankly extortion and blackmail that the DUP did. I can kind of agree with you, Kevin, about Northern Ireland. I certainly don't agree with you about Scotland. I mean, this is supposed to be the Conservative and Unionist Party. Of course they're not. There's only one Unionist Party in the UK, and that's the Brexit Party. But the fact is...
Dems are a unionist party in that way. We enjoy having...
Anyway, what did you make of...
Lukewarm unionist.
What do you make of the speech just before Christmas there from Boris Johnson, just after the election? I mean, he does seem as if he's trying to sort of be friendly to the Northerners that voted for Labour, but the idea is, look, we just want to get this out of the way and get on with running the country. That's the basis of what he's saying there.
The problem with what Boris Johnson says is that there is no perfect Brexit just waiting out there for us to pick it up and get ready. You know, he's absolutely lying. There is not an oven-ready plan. You know, we definitely need to negotiate. We haven't got enough trade negotiators to do that. There is no sort of Elysian fields for solution for us to do that. And we've got to stop thinking that these complex questions and sorting out our lives is a really, really simple thing to do. It isn't.
But doing nothing for 3.5 years isn't a solution either.
I used to work for a Vitulin and bonded warehouse, delivering food to Sally Line ferries and P&O ferries. It's a hell of a lot of paperwork. And bringing that back in is going to delay goods coming in and out of the country. And yes, there is an opportunity here for Bristol Port to be a free port and to have those, increase the Vitulin and the bonded warehouse goods and to pay tax only when the goods actually come in. And so there are some opportunities here for Bristol, and I think that's important. This is a local Bristol radio station, and we need to think about what's the impact of Brexit on Bristol, because as mayor I wouldn't be involved in that national framework, but I would absolutely be standing up for the opportunities that we need to provide for people in Bristol.
Actually, the city, we used to own the port, didn't we, years ago, and George Ferguson, as mayor, he sold off to some of his merchant venture friends.
Yeah, and then you might say that, I couldn't possibly comment, but the whole point is that, yes, those the port has given significant donations both to Boris Johnson and to one of the other leadership contenders for the Conservative Party.
Can I divert us just very slightly to about 2 months ago, Boris Johnson spent 3 hours with the Irish Taoiseach. Well, neither of them are great in terms of concentration. Leo's a lot better than... But Boris Johnson has an attention span of 10 minutes. Now, what on earth did those two talk about? And I've spent the past 2 months trying to find out. Ireland is very leaky. There are no secrets. And whatever he and Boris talked about so far, zilch. The best I can give you is Leo told Boris the facts of life.
Well, I mean,
and after 2 months of effort with my leaky Irish friends, that's inadequate. But I think something very serious was discussed.
Well, what are you talking about? Give us an idea what you think. Your speculation.
Okay,
come on.
My speculation, page 245 of John le Carré's last book. And that's where the Anglo-American conspiracy against the EU is revealed.
So you think the Irish are in on that?
Boris Johnson each month is signing off on American surveillance in the United Kingdom already. Now, Ireland last year, on the 1st of November, did something incredibly curious. GCHQ in public, in Dublin, very charming Irish director of GCHQ, invited the Irish to join GCHQ in a campaign against Russian cyber crime. And the Irish said, bugger off. They told GCHQ to take a hop because GCHQ is not accused by the Irish of doing criminal surveillance itself, but GCHQ's partner, the National Security Agency, is. And the Irish said goodbye. A little tiny country like that telling GCHQ to go.
Okay, well, that's an interesting theory.
But the fact is, the Republic of Ireland's a small country, the island of Ireland's small, the Republic of Ireland is a small country, and going right back to de Valera's day, they had to walk a real tightrope, didn't they, back in the Second World War and all the rest of it, the emergency, I think they called it, and what have you. So the fact is, the Irish have performed this tightrope, but the biggest customers commercially of the Irish Republic, the farm products and all the rest of it, is the UK. And, you know, if there is going to be a border, whether between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland or between Northern Ireland and mainland Great Britain, that's an issue. And, of course, they need to be talking about it. It's a major trade partner. And there is the cultural and historic relation of the freedom of movement of goods, labour, services, capital between Ireland...
Richard, can I just take you closer? The incident with GCHQ was public.
Well,
you know, it wasn't secret sources.
Can I just get on? Can I just move on things? Because we need to have a little listen to Jeremy Corbyn as his reply at the Brexit debate. Everyone was sort of wondering, you know, is he going to soften his stance on Brexit after the general election result? The answer, I'm afraid, is no.
We cannot go on forever debating what happened in 2016, and we have to respect that decision and move on. However, Mr. Speaker, understanding all this doesn't mean that we as a party and a movement should abandon our basic principles or ever give up the demand for a fairer and more just society. We warned before the general election the Prime Minister's Brexit deal was a terrible deal for our country, and we still believe it's a terrible deal today. I'll give way later on. It will not protect or strengthen our rights, or support our manufacturing industry, or our vital trading relationships, or protect our natural world in a time of unprecedented climate crisis. Neither will it address the deep inequality in our system or secure the interests of every nation and region in the United Kingdom. Instead, under the Conservatives, this deal will be used as a battering ram to drive us down the path of yet more deregulation and towards a toxic deal with Donald Trump and that will sell out our National Health Service and push up the price of medicines to benefit US drug corporations. It will take us away from the essential principles we believe in, of a country that looks after everybody and protects those communities left behind by the excesses of the free market. This deal does not bring certainty for communities or for business or the workforce. In fact, Mr. Speaker, it does the opposite and hardwires the risk of a no-deal Brexit next year. I'm sure that will delight many members on the benches opposite, but not those who suffer the consequences in communities and workplaces all across the country.
Now, Richard Ford from the Brexit Party, this is the big question that the Labour Party are absolutely hinging everything on here, is that the consequences of Brexit are going to be devastating for the poorer communities in the country.
Well, I think the consequences of the 3.5 years of uncertainty, lack of investment that's been engendered by the Remain camp are what the poorer people in this country need to fear, because we've been in this stasis for so long. You know, the fact of the matter is, what he was talking about social provisions and social care and so on, that was far more advanced in this country than in many other EU countries. We had a lot of those things before we joined the EU. The idea that we're going to leave the European Union and become...
So what are you going to do, wind the clock back?
No, not at all. This kind of idea that we're going to leave and become a slave or vassal state of the US, like some kind of South Vietnam, is just, frankly, not credible.
Well, I mean, hang on a minute, because the United States has got its military dotted all over our country. Every time the US decides it wants to go to war, apart from Vietnam, I think was the last time we didn't go along with them.
The US military have been here since the Second World War, and we're bloody glad they came here in the Second World War, thank you very much.
What I'm saying is we're really a vassal state as it is.
Not at all. They're by treaty, they're there by NATO.
Can I just come in?
I mean, you're an ex-British Army officer,
it's
so...
a hard fact. The courts have found, all the courts, ours and others, and Parliament, has found that we are under mass surveillance by the National Security Agency. Sounds like spook stuff, it isn't. These are court judgments. Parliament has published the evidence. We're already done for.
So, Mary, let you weigh in on this one. Are we or are we not part of the American empire?
Good question. Personally, being, not born round here, I was born in Kent, closer to France than I was to London, that I definitely identify with being European rather than towards the States mentality. I'd much rather have sort of a whole load of extra national holidays and that sort of more relaxed cafe culture than having just a two-week holiday.
Public debt that you can't.
No, they're not all like that. Look at Germany. So I think the whole thing is each individual identifies with where they identify. There's a whole load of good whichever country in the world, because there is no one solution. There is what is right, the combination that you need to provide for the hugely diverse community that we have here in Bristol.
I mean, we've just had the Americans last night take out, literally assassinate, murder a top Iranian general, for example. Now, that doesn't surely go along with Trump's policy, which he stood for. This is to stop any kind of Middle East conflicts, to pull troops out of the Middle East. I mean, this is the American...
It's a very, very dangerous manoeuvre, isn't it? There are already people who are burning the American flag because of that. He might, Iran is a brutal regime which has done pretty much nothing to sort of, work with the West.
Well, they say the same about us,
yeah, absolutely. But the whole point is we have to have dialogue. If you take out a key strategic military leader without putting other structures in its place, then that is one of the most destabilising acts when an economy or a country and their peace is on a knife edge. And this is it's an incredibly dangerous game that Trump has embarked
Richard, we haven't seen Boris Johnson distancing himself from this, have we, either? I mean, this is quite an important thing last night.
Absolutely, and I don't think we know yet what the reasons are or were. And I was thinking about that today. Now, of course it's an invasion of... It's a sovereignty issue. Has Trump been accountable to the Congress? all the rest of it. Now, all we can believe or hope is that he was aware of information that we don't yet know. And I was thinking today, thinking, how could this be justified? This is the kind of thing Israel's done before as well. They went to South America and got Eichmann and what have you, tried him, and other things they've done. But the fact is, if we had known before the Second World War what Hitler was going to do, if he'd been taken out, would 6 million people have been saved in that way?
But by that argument, you could go around pointing to any foreign leader, elected or otherwise, and say, well, there's the new
I'm not making this argument. I'm just saying, I'm trying to think of it. Had we known before September the 11th that was going to be happening, would it have been better to have preemptively taken those people out?
But it echoes the issue that we had taking out Saddam Hussein, and the way that destabilises and allows other unknowns or other military leaders to take advantage of that vacuum at the top.
So if you'd taken Hitler out, it would have destabilised the Nazi regime then on that basis?
It can, but it also can allow other people to come up. So if you go in without having an exit strategy, and that's what's wrong with what happened in Iraq, and that's why Labour was so wrong to have backed the Iraq.
One of the reasons Boris hasn't
with Trump's
hasn't said
now,
anything
there
about
is no exit
it,
strategy,
apparently, is that he wasn't told at all that it was going to happen.
Well, it doesn't surprise me, to be honest, that he wasn't told. I mean,
But now, just again, it's a slight sidetrack. We went to Cornwall a couple of weeks ago, and we stopped at Jamaica Inn. Some of you may even know it.
Yeah.
And I saw a book that I haven't seen for years. It's Daphne du Maurier's Rule Britannia, the 51st state. And again, it never cropped up in the election. Nobody mentioned it.
But this whole business of being the 51st state, when Adenauer founded the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949, he was accused of being the 51st state of America and being under American control and having American troops on his soil and all the rest.
I follow you because, yes. Yeah, but the problem here is the surveillance is criminal.
Well, okay, let's just draw a line under that for a second, because we're drifting away from the future of the Labour Party, which is what I wanted to try and talk about, playing Jeremy Corbyn there. I wonder, maybe you first, Mary, who you think may be in the running for taking over. I think it's around about Easter time, March time, we're going to get a new Labour leader. Jeremy Corbyn's trying to guide that process and do a sort of granddaddy job. In the meantime, who do you think are the front runners and why?
In the same way that I wouldn't want Labour to be speculating about who is the best leader for the Liberal Democrats, I think that it's not for me to comment on who should be the best leader for another political party. That's not my political belief set.
Should we just give you what
there are
William Hill is saying? Keir Starmer number one at 8 to 13, which is.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if they actually picked a female leader?
Rebecca Long Bailey's next. She's the one who's favoured by the current leadership at 10 to 3. Then we've got Lisa Nandy, Jez Phillips.
Jez Phillips, if I had to pick one, she'd get my.
Very feisty. Keith Starmer's out in front.
He is, and he's. What do you make of the way that this race is turning out here?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because first off, really, was Long Bailey, because she's a protégé of Corbyn, and I read something in The Guardian 3-4 days ago that she'd written, like a bit of a manifesto. And, frankly, it was like a sixth form politics student had written it on the bus on the way to school. And I just couldn't believe it. This is somebody who's standing for the leadership of the Labour Party. And then I saw a tweet from some bigwig in Labour, or some lefty, basically saying the same thing. And I thought, that's just amazing. She's just not up to it. But, of course, with Starmer, who probably is the most qualified, you've got yet another London-based lawyer. I don't think it's relevant whether he's a man or a woman. The fact is you need the best candidate for the job. And there's been too much of this sort of adverse discrimination, or whatever it's called. The fact is you should choose...
Positive. It's called positive discrimination.
Well, I think it's unpositive, because I think actually you should choose the best candidate, whether they're gay or straight, male or female, black or white. You should have the best candidate for the job. And if Starmer is the best candidate, I'm not saying he is, because I was reading today. I was reading today that Starmer is not well received again up north. You know, he's well received in the. He's an MP for Holborn and St Pancras.
So what you're saying is they could be making the same mistake they made in the general election all over again by being a southern-based, London-based party.
I don't know, because
can we just let Mary have her say?
I do think that there's a serious point to be had here. We have got tens, maybe hundreds of years worth of setting the standards of achievement, setting the standards of leadership by male parameters, by male standards of that, because it has been predominantly men that have been in control. And that means that we pretend we have this situation in society where people are judged by their merits and by their skill set. But actually, if that means we are judging people by their ability to be a great orator and to tell lies like Boris has done, or to be an orator in the same way that Corbyn has been inspirational, then that actually does work against the way that women operate and in the general way that they operate in terms of the general collaboration and working together. And I'm not saying that they are absolute traits, because obviously they are not. But the whole thing is they are. I'm saying that there are some generalisations in terms, and certainly meritocracy, which says these are the standards by which you need to be judged.
So all men are aggressive and confrontational, and all
no,
women are collaborative.
Of course they're not. Well, you know, that's the whole point. No, it's not. It's like it works. You know, it works across the board in terms of saying that if you have standards that are set without taking into account the diversity mix, and we know that when Apple designed an app, a health app, which failed to put in anything about tracking the menstrual cycle for women, because it was completely done by men, and they didn't think about it being necessary. We're 50% of the population, and sometimes you need that mix. You need representation in order to get your issues thought about. If you are not sat at the table, you are on the menu.
As a final item, Mary, I'd just like to ask you about Bristol Energy, because this is something where I'm really concerned. There are lots and lots of public money. You know, some people are being taken to court for not paying their council tax bills when they've got actually no income at all, and yet that money is being given to this company called Bristol Energy.
It's a huge risk to the Bristol taxpayer.
I mean, I invited them on this programme several times. They just refuse to come on, even to advertise their products. So they've obviously got no confidence in their ability to run a successful business.
If the debts of Bristol Energy end up having to come back onto the books of Bristol Council, that is a financial disaster. There were papers at the outset when it was set up, ways of setting the company up, where one scenario was actually described by the council officers as a disaster scenario. I have an awful feeling that unfortunately that was the setup of the company that was chosen, and certainly when I get in as mayor I will be publishing that documentation and making sure that it is transparent, because it is not acceptable to be putting the Bristol taxpayer at that amount of risk for a private company which basically is selling cheap energy to people who don't live in Bristol. You know, it would be wonderful if everybody in Bristol could sign up and use Bristol Energy and get the benefit of the tariffs, but it isn't doing what it should do. Even with that, I'm told that, you know, the tariffs aren't necessarily what we would need to do. So perhaps need some white label tariffs and a new way of running that company.
Okay, well, it'd be good to hear that some stuff will be published. It'd be nice if the Mayor could publish that straight away, actually. Thanks to our guests, LibDem Bristol Mayor Candidate Mary Page, and former Brexit Party prospective parliamentary candidate for Gloucester, Richard Ford. Also, Kevin Cahill. Join me after the US-owned Comcast News at 7 as we take our weekly look around the world.